My name is Rachel Carter, and I spent 4 years building someone else's empire brick by brick, only to be told I'd never be good enough to lead in it. When I first joined Mercer Technologies, I was 29, hungry, ambitious, and maybe a little too trusting. I wasn't from a prestigious school or one of those polished Ivy League programs that seem to fast-track every other manager in the building. No, I came from a mid-tier university, worked full-time through my degree, and clawed my way up from support analyst to product lead at a mid-sized logistics company. I didn't have the perfect pedigree, but I had what mattered, results. And Mercer was supposed to be the big break. The company was sleek, fast-paced, and ruthless in a way that both intimidated and fascinated me. Its open offices, whiteboards full of wireframes, coffee machines that never stopped. Everything screamed, we only hire the best. I was told I'd be working under Jordan Pierce, the VP of Product. His name had weight in the industry. He'd spoken at conferences, sat on advisory boards, had articles written about him in TechPulse. But within a week of working with him, I knew the truth. Jordan didn't build anything. He collected credit. The first meeting I had with him, I showed him my redesigned concept for Novalink, an internal logistics optimization tool that every other product lead had abandoned. It was messy, outdated, and considered a career killer. Jordan handed it off to me because, in his words, "You seem like someone who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty." Translation: if I failed, it wouldn't matter. If I succeeded, he'd make sure it looked like his idea. I poured everything into Novalink. Late nights, early mornings, interviews with every department using the tool. I ran my own mini focus groups. Partnered with engineering, cleaned up the backlog, redefined the KPIs, and basically rewrote the entire functionality from scratch. 3 months in, the tool's performance was up 71%. Ticket volume dropped by half. The warehouse teams called it usable for the first time in years. Jordan, he barely said thank you. At the next company-wide demo, he presented Novalink like it had been his baby all along. We streamlined the UX and improved throughput using advanced telemetry mapping, he said, clicking through my interface. This is what strong product vision looks like. I stood in the back of the room, silent. No one even looked at me. 6 months later, I applied for an internal role, Director of Product Strategy. The opening came up after a major reorg, and it was my shot. I had led 2 successful product revamps by then, mentored 2 junior PMs, and presented in 3 executive stand-ups. Jordan knew I was applying. He even acted supportive at first. "Go for it. Nothing wrong with a little ambition," he said with that fake smile of his. But something didn't sit right. A week later, I found out from a colleague in HR that Jordan had gone to the selection committee before the interviews and told them I lacked strategic depth and wasn't ready for a leadership position. My interview felt off from the start. Polite but mechanical. They asked none of the high-level questions I'd prepared for. No vision talk, no product road mapping. Just vague, generic stuff like, how do you deal with conflict? And how do you prioritize tasks? The rejection email came 3 days later. And I'll never forget what Jordan said to me when I walked into his office afterward. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "Look, you're a great executor, Alicia. Really. Reliable. But leadership? It's a different game. Some people lead. Others follow. That's not an insult. It's just the way the world works." I stood there frozen. Not because I was surprised, but because in that moment, something inside me solidified. He had never planned to promote me. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how perfect my performance was, I was never going to be more than the silent hand behind his success. So I said nothing, just nodded, turned, and walked out of his office. But inside, a storm had started. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to fight him out in the open. I was going to build everything he said I couldn't, and take it all back. Not with words, with action, with patience, with strategy. After that conversation with Jordan, something shifted in me. Not outwardly, not yet. Outwardly, I was the same Rachel Carter. Organized, reliable, delivering on every sprint, always prepared for every stakeholder review. But inside, I was done trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for me. I wasn't going to wait for someone to hand me a promotion. I was going to build my own damn table. But that kind of plan takes time. And silence. The first thing I did was stop performing for Jordan. No more over-explaining my work. No more trying to impress him in meetings. I focused instead on building influence with the people who actually mattered: engineers, designers, analysts, and even the sales team. It started small. I'd stay late, Not to prove anything, but to help other teams solve problems Jordan never paid attention to. The customer success team was overwhelmed by support tickets from our glitchy legacy product. I created a custom dashboard in my own time that helped them triage bugs by urgency and frequency. I didn't tell Jordan. I told Liam, the head of customer success, and I made sure he knew who helped his team when no one else would. When the engineers got stuck in sprint cycles that were impossible to complete, I rewrote user stories, cut unnecessary features, and facilitated after-hours retros so they could breathe again. I didn't ask for permission, and I didn't take credit. I let the results speak. Word started to spread. Rachel's solid. She actually listens. She gets it. I wasn't climbing a ladder anymore. I was building a network. One engineer I helped, Sophie Tran, later introduced me to a woman named Lena Brooks, a well-connected product consultant who had quietly left Mercer after her own run-in with Jordan. We met for coffee. She listened to my story, nodded slowly, and said, "You're not the first, but if you're smart, you could be the last." Lena became my first unofficial advisor. She taught me the part of product management that no one ever talks about, the politics. Good product leaders don't just know roadmaps, she told me. They know how to navigate power, and how to collect it quietly. Over the next few months, I began creating what I called my shadow roadmap. Not for any product. For my future. I opened a private LLC under a different name. I called it Carter Labs. I told no one at work. Using savings and small freelance gigs, I hired 2 junior developers to start prototyping a new productivity tool I'd been thinking about for years. Something that could actually fix the internal problems I kept seeing at Mercer. Bloated workflows, invisible team members, broken feedback loops. It wasn't about competing with Mercer. Not yet. It was about building something real. Something that was mine. I didn't want a new job. I wanted leverage. At Mercer, Jordan barely noticed. He was too busy polishing his image, prepping for another conference, and promoting one of his buddies, a guy named Matt who called women chicks and thought empathy was a weakness. Rachel, still stuck at the same desk. But I was playing the long game. Every coffee I bought, every conversation I had in the elevator, every spreadsheet I fixed without being asked, it was all part of something bigger. I was building capital. Not money. Influence. Loyalty. Reputation. Because I knew, sooner or later, Jordan would make a mistake. And when he did, I'd be ready. By the time winter rolled around, Mercer Technologies was changing. Not in its branding, not in its leadership, but underneath, like something rotting behind a polished wall. And Jordan, still smooth, still smug, still running the product department like a one-man show. But even the sharpest suits can't hide what's coming when your house starts to crack. And I was paying attention. It started with a simple launch delay. Jordan had fast-tracked a new AI feature for a client portal without consulting engineering or QA. On paper, it looked sexy, machine learning-driven personalization. The kind of buzzword-laden pitch that made investors drool. He gave it a name, Mercer Sync AI. But the actual product? Half-baked. The model hadn't been trained. The front end was glitchy. And worst of all, it was tied to an existing client contract with strict delivery deadlines. Behind closed doors, engineering panicked. Jordan, he was already talking about it at tech meetups, selling the fantasy like it already existed. When the missed deadline hit, the client, a healthcare platform, sent a scathing complaint. Not only did they pull funding, but they threatened legal action for breach of terms. That was the first public stain on Jordan's reputation. He blamed everyone but himself. First engineering, then product managers, then process misalignment. But what he didn't realize was, people had started documenting things. Liam, the head of customer success, forwarded me internal email chains. So did Sophie from engineering. So did Tarek, a quiet, meticulous senior dev who had once been shouted down by Jordan in a meeting for thinking too small. Jordan had alienated a lot of people. He thought fear was loyalty. But fear only works until people get angry enough, or fed up enough, to start telling the truth. That's when I started planting seeds. I didn't try to blow him up. I wasn't stupid. I used whispers. At one Friday happy hour, I casually mentioned to a few leads. It's wild how many hands touched Sync AI, but none of them were ever in the room when it was pitched. One of them laughed. Another nodded. Someone added, "Yeah, and none of us were told about the legal risk until the client threatened to walk." I let them talk. I just listened. A few weeks later, I had lunch with Lena again, my off-the-record mentor. She looked at me over her coffee and said, "There's a saying in corporate politics. If someone is lighting fires everywhere, give them matches. They'll burn the house down without realizing you handed them the spark." Jordan had no idea I was watching the house burn. In meetings, I still played the loyal PM. Took notes. Managed timelines. Delivered decks. He once patted my shoulder after a team call and said, "You're the glue, Rachel. Don't worry, you'll always have a spot here." I smiled, said thanks, then went home and worked 5 more hours on Carter Labs. My tool, tentatively named Signal, was coming together. We'd built a lightweight prototype. It tracked internal workflows, spotlighted task bottlenecks, and gave managers real-time insights into employee workload, communication gaps, and project health. It was everything Mercer pretended to do, but actually functional and clean. I showed a mock-up to Lena. She blinked once, then said, This isn't just revenge. This is scalable, sellable." But I wasn't there yet. First, Jordan had to fall, and I didn't want to destroy him with fire. I wanted to make him irrelevant. And that starts with people quietly turning their backs when you speak. Soon, I wasn't the only one who saw the throne shaking. Matt, Jordan's golden boy, started pulling away. He stopped defending Jordan's decisions in meetings. He started floating his own ideas to the VP of operations, subtly trying to position himself as an alternative voice. It was clumsy, obvious, but useful, because desperation smells. And I made sure others noticed it too. At an all-hands, Jordan stumbled over his numbers, referred to a non-existent customer engagement index as the reason for our recent drop in retention. Someone, I'll never say who, leaked the recording to internal audit. The trust he'd spent years manufacturing? It wasn't gone yet, but the surface had cracked. And I was just getting started. When you want to take down a man like Jordan Pierce, you don't do it with confrontation. You do it with preparation. And people. By now, the cracks in Jordan's reputation were spreading. The failed Sync AI launch had made people nervous. Clients were uneasy. Executives were asking more questions. But Mercer Technologies was still Mercer, still a massive, well-oiled machine run on politics, money, and public image. Jordan still had control. But it was fragile, and I was quietly building the pressure underneath. The first real shift started with finance. One day, while waiting for the elevator, I struck up a conversation with Naomi Fisher, a mid-level finance analyst who looked exhausted. She was pulling a triple shift trying to track departmental overspending, a common occurrence, thanks to Jordan's vision-first, paperwork-later approach. "I swear," she said to me, sighing, "he just burns through money like it grows in his suit pocket." I asked what she meant. She rolled her eyes and whispered, "You didn't hear it from me, but he authorized 5 figures in contractor payments for that AI mess without approvals. Said it would be reconciled later." It's not reconciled. That was my in. I offered to help her organize product department invoices, just to make sure things stay clean from our end. She hesitated at first. Then I sent her a formatted, automated template I'd built with filtering logic and color-coded flagging. It took me 2 hours. It saved her 10 hours a week. She started feeding me internal budget patterns. Not confidential documents, not yet, but information. Just enough to see how chaotic things really were under Jordan's leadership. Contractor invoices with no signed scopes. Project budgets ballooning without results. Vendor payments labeled as special initiatives that had no project names attached. "It's like he's spending to make noise," Naomi said. "No one's stopping him." Not yet. I didn't need to stop him. I just needed to track him. Every misstep, every shady transaction. I kept it all. Quietly. In a secure cloud folder. Labeled by date. Cross-referenced with project timelines. Meanwhile, I kept strengthening my internal alliances. I hosted working lunches. Technically casual but strategically important. Small groups, an engineer here, a designer there, an operations lead. We didn't talk about Jordan directly. I just listened. I pitched 3 features. All ignored. I fixed a bug he said was unfixable in 2 days. He didn't even reply to the update. You ever notice how he never forgets who made a mistake, but always forgets who made it work? I wasn't recruiting an army. I was planting doubt, in him, not in me. And it worked. I could see it in how people started coming to me first with questions, not Jordan. People began trusting my feedback over his direction. They copied me on internal threads without even thinking about it. Then came a critical moment. An internal survey went out from HR, anonymous, supposedly, asking for feedback about leadership transparency, team morale, communication quality. I don't know who submitted what, but within 2 weeks, I overheard in the hallway. Apparently someone accused Jordan of gaslighting them in one-on-ones. HR's doing a quiet review. I didn't know who wrote it, but I knew they weren't lying. Jordan had this way of twisting conversations, telling you one thing in private, then claiming he said the opposite in a meeting, discrediting ideas by saying, "We've already tried that," when no one had. And if you disagreed with him, he'd smile, but your name would vanish from any future initiative. And then came the Connor incident. Connor Mitchell was a junior PM. Smart, eager, a little green. He presented an idea for streamlining feature rollout timelines across teams using a systemized rollout framework he developed in his grad program. It was a good idea. Jordan tore it apart in front of 10 people, called it textbook nonsense, and accused Connor of wasting the team's time with theoretical fluff. The next day, Connor quit. No notice. Just a short Slack message. Not a good fit. Thanks for the opportunity. People were stunned. Not because Connor left, but because no one said anything to stop it. That silence was louder than any shout. I sent Connor a message that evening. Told him I admired his proposal and that I'd implemented some of his framework internally. He replied with a thank you and a file attachment. It was a zipped folder. Inside, screenshots of Slack messages between Jordan and the leadership channel. In one of them, Jordan had written, "Connor's too soft for this environment. We should weed out the weak early." It was all I needed. Not to blackmail, to build leverage. By now, I had what I call a silent playbook, a private record of everything. Budget inconsistencies, employee mistreatment, abandoned projects, burned junior talent, and slowly declining results. And I wasn't the only one with doubts anymore. People were whispering. Meetings felt colder. Jordan's jokes didn't land. And most importantly, he was starting to notice. He called me into his office one afternoon. Not for anything urgent. Just a quick catch-up. He leaned back in his chair, looking me over with that familiar smugness. "You've been busy lately. Heard your name pop up in a few unexpected places." I smiled. Just trying to keep things running smoothly. He narrowed his eyes. "You're not gunning for anything, are you, Rachel?" I tilted my head and replied, "You told me I wasn't leadership material." I took that seriously. Then I stood up, thanked him, and walked out of the room. Because the difference between ambition and strategy? Ambition tells you to chase power. Strategy waits for power to be offered by the people who are ready to give it to you. And soon, they would be. It was just after New Year's when the collapse began. Mercer Technologies had barely returned to full operations after the holiday lull. The hallways still echoed with half-hearted resolutions and recycled jokes about caffeine addiction. Jordan walked in like a man ready to take on the world, still wearing the same smug smirk he'd had when the stock price was peaking. But what none of us knew, what even Jordan didn't know, was that while he was on vacation in Aspen, a single client's decision had quietly detonated a chain reaction. The client was Ardent Systems, a mid-sized logistics firm that used Mercer's integrated tracking software, a product Jordan had claimed to personally overhaul the year before. In reality, I had done most of the legwork, and I knew exactly how shaky that system was. What we didn't realize at the time was that Ardent had begun experiencing data loss. Not catastrophic, but frequent enough to erode trust. They reported the issue twice in December. Jordan had ignored both reports. Said it was just noise from small players. But it wasn't noise. Ardent Systems canceled their contract. Quietly. And they weren't small. They were the lead domino. Within 2 weeks, 2 more clients followed suit. Revenue projections dropped. Internal models flagged Q1 as unstable. The board started asking questions. And that's when it happened. A full-blown internal audit. It was subtle at first, requests for documents, inquiries into project spend, emails asking for clarifications. But then finance began pulling transaction histories. Legal got involved. HR started reviewing management complaints. Jordan tried to play it cool. He hosted a department-wide call where he brushed it off as a routine operational tune-up and told us, with a casual laugh, that anyone who's got nothing to hide has nothing to worry about. But people were worried, especially Jordan, because he had plenty to hide. In the middle of that chaos, I received an unexpected message. It was from Elena Morris, Mercer's chief operating officer. She asked me to meet her privately. No calendar invite. No reason given. I arrived at her office nervous but curious. Elena wasn't someone who made time for middle managers. She greeted me without small talk. Just said, "I've been hearing your name a lot lately." I played dumb. In what context? The kind where people say, "Ask Rachel. She'll have a better process," or "Rachel's already solved that problem." I read your Novalink notes. Quietly brilliant. And I also know you worked on Sync AI, even though Jordan said he was the architect. She paused. I need clarity, Rachel. And I need someone who isn't compromised. That was the moment. Not a promotion. Not a promise. But a door. And I had the keys. Over the next 2 weeks, I began providing discreet insights to Elena. Nothing disloyal, just facts. Budget discrepancies, missed timelines, unaddressed client issues, developer turnover rates. She never asked for speculation, just data. And I gave her plenty. All while Jordan continued to posture like nothing was wrong. He still walked into meetings late. Still cracked jokes. Still pretended not to notice that his name was slowly slipping from the agenda. Then came the final straw. A leaked internal report, marked confidential, was shared anonymously with senior leadership. It detailed project overspending, grossly exaggerated feature reports, and a side-by-side comparison of Jordan's public claims versus internal documentation. The leak. No one ever found out who did it. But I can tell you this. It wasn't sloppy. It was surgical. And it killed what was left of Jordan's credibility. Suddenly, everything began moving fast. The board demanded a full project-by-project review. Jordan was pulled into back-to-back closed-door meetings. He started snapping at people in the hallway, calling in sick, sending instructions through Matt instead of facing the team. People started joking, behind his back, that we were running a department without a head. But I wasn't laughing. I was busy, because this was the moment I'd been waiting for. While Jordan flailed, I stepped in not officially but organically. Someone needed to keep the roadmap on track. I did it. Someone needed to consolidate the audit notes. I compiled them. Someone needed to present project health metrics to ops. I built a custom dashboard, tied into real-time updates, and gave it a clean, branded interface. I called it Pulse. Elena forwarded it to the CEO with one sentence. This is what leadership actually looks like. Matt, Jordan's loyal lieutenant, tried to keep up. He even cornered me once in the kitchen. You know this is all temporary, right? Jordan's not going anywhere. I just smiled and said, neither am I. And then one cold Thursday morning it happened. A company-wide email. Subject line, leadership transition update. Jordan was stepping down to explore new opportunities. Effective immediately. No farewell party. No internal video. Just gone. The man who told me I wasn't leadership material had been removed. Not with fireworks, not with scandal, but with disinterest. And Mercer? It didn't pause. It didn't flinch. Because the teams had already started listening to someone else. They were already following me. Jordan's exit didn't come with thunder. It came with a whisper. A short, sterile email. A few murmurs around the office. A couple of confused Slack threads that ended in awkward silence. No ceremony. No legacy speech. Just a power vacuum. And I was standing at the edge of it. Within hours of the announcement, my inbox started to change. Requests for decision sign-offs. Calendar invites to meetings I was never in before. Senior leadership CCing me instead of Matt, who had conveniently taken a personal leave the same day Jordan resigned. Then came the message I was half expecting. From Elena Morris. Subject, interim-led coverage. Rachel, we'd like you to step in as interim director of product strategy while we assess permanent options. You already have the team's trust, and your performance during the audit spoke for itself. I'll loop you in with HR and ops to formalize coverage. No fanfare. No back and forth. Just like that, I had the title. Interim. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure. Because stepping into the light meant no more cover. No more safety in shadows. Now people were looking at me, really looking, and wondering, can she actually lead? Or was she just good at pointing out someone else's mistakes? And I knew the answer couldn't come from a single project or a clever dashboard. It had to come from the culture I built, the momentum I created, and more importantly, how I handled the resistance. Because it came fast. On my second day as interim director, I joined my first senior staff sync, something Jordan had always kept us out of. 10 executives. Dozens of acronyms. People talking more about optics than outcomes. I listened more than I spoke. But when the COO asked for a roadmap update, I gave a clear summary, backed with metrics. When someone tried to challenge my velocity estimates, I calmly explained the model. I wasn't dazzling anyone, but I was holding my ground. Until Ronald Glenn, the head of engineering, leaned forward and said, half smiling, "With all due respect, Rachel, this isn't a bootstrapped side project anymore. We need scalable strategy now, not just clean dashboards." It wasn't just a jab. It was a challenge, a reminder that I still hadn't earned this space in everyone's eyes. I paused, looked at him. Then it's a good thing I've already started rebuilding our delivery pipeline from the ground up. I'll send you the updated backlog filter system later today. Your team's going to save about 18 hours a week. He didn't smile, but he nodded. Still, not everyone was subtle. A week into the interim role, I received an anonymous tip from a burner email saying that Jordan had leaked internal performance reviews to a few investors before leaving, to try and poison the well against me. I couldn't confirm it, but I didn't need to. The board wasn't calling. I wasn't being introduced to them. They were still watching, waiting. So I did what I'd always done. I worked. But this time I worked visibly. I made every roadmap public to the product team. Launched bi-weekly review sessions with cross-department feedback. Started lunch and learn sessions for junior employees to present ideas to directors, something Jordan never would have allowed. It wasn't just about getting buy-in. It was about rewriting the rules. A month later, HR sent me a calendar invite. Subject: offer discussion. My heart skipped. I walked into the room with Elena and 2 board reps on a video call. No ceremony. No surprises. Just one offer. Director of Product Strategy, permanent position. Full executive access. Bonus eligibility. Performance equity. And a seat at the quarterly leadership summit. I didn't celebrate. I thanked them. Shook hands. Signed the contract. Then I left the building, sat in my car, and stared at the steering wheel for 5 minutes. Because I realized something terrifying. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. The title didn't mean power. It meant access. Power was something else entirely, something deeper. Power was what let Jordan manipulate people for years. Power was what let him cover his tracks, spin failure into leadership, gaslight employees, and walk away with a golden parachute. I didn't just want the seat. I wanted the infrastructure, the decision-making tools, the relationships, the trust from the top down and from the bottom up. So I wrote myself a new mission, a short document. I called it Legacy Plan, 6 months to ownership. Ownership of process. Ownership of culture. Ownership of the reputation Jordan thought I could never have. It had 3 goals. Turn the product department into a self-accountable team. No black boxes, no power silos. Win at least 2 major client projects on delivery and feedback. Gain a voice at the board level. Not through ego, but through impact. Because Jordan once said I wasn't leadership material. And now, I was the one deciding what leadership looked like. The strangest thing about replacing someone like Jordan Pierce wasn't the new office, or the title, or even the money. It was the silence. There were no loud shoes storming through meetings, no public takedowns in team calls, no toxic laughter echoing from behind closed doors. For the first time in years, the product floor felt calm. Too calm. Like the stillness that settles just before a storm comes rolling back in. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The small hesitations in people's voices, the glances over shoulders during team reviews, the vague tension that lingered even though things were getting better. I had delivered my first major milestone as director. We relaunched Novalink 2.0, fully integrated, user-friendly, and scalable across 3 industries. Client satisfaction scores had jumped. Retention had stabilized. Even Ronald Glenn, the same engineering head who once challenged my credibility, sent a Slack message saying, "Solid work, Rachel. This is the cleanest launch we've had in years." So why the unease? Why the undercurrent of doubt? I didn't have to wait long to find out. It started as a rumor. A product designer forwarded me an email thread that had been circulating through back channels, a blind carbon copy forwarded from a private Gmail address. No name, just screenshots. Quotes pulled from a confidential internal Slack, twisted and rearranged to make it look like I'd stolen Novalink's framework from another team. "Rachel Carter's just Jordan in a blazer," one line read. Another message claimed I'd taken over the department, by seducing the execs with soft metrics and polished language. There was even a PDF attached. It looked like a report, mocked up in Mercer's old slide format, suggesting I had failed to disclose conflicts of interest when hiring the contractors for Carter Labs. I sat at my desk, staring at it. Heart steady, mind racing. Only one person could have known enough to put this together. Jordan Pierce. I checked the file's metadata. Nothing definitive, scrubbed clean. But a few things stood out. The deck included images from inside Mercer, images that were not public. One showed a prototype of Pulse, the dashboard I'd built. Another had a cropped chart from my personal laptop that had never been uploaded to the company drive. Jordan hadn't just left Mercer. He'd taken files with him. And now he was trying to rewrite the story, not through courts or boardrooms, but through whispers. I didn't panic. Instead, I traced the PDF to its first appearance, a password-protected Notion page hosted anonymously and linked in a group chat used by contractors from a small accelerator firm. Atlas Bay, one of Jordan's former consulting partners. He had allies still, people on the fringe, not strong enough to challenge me directly, but slippery enough to sow confusion. So I changed the game. I called a closed meeting with legal, HR, and Elena Morris. I laid everything out, calmly, factually. The timeline, the leaks, the stolen files, the slander. Then I said, I'm not asking for retaliation. I'm asking for a company-wide data review and a security sweep. I want every Mercer laptop and cloud archive tied to Jordan's access credentials checked for unauthorized downloads. They agreed. Not because they liked me, but because Mercer couldn't afford another scandal. And I made sure to position it that way, not as personal revenge, but as risk management. 2 days later, they found what I expected. Jordan had exported several files the week before his resignation. Product documentation, budget memos, internal reviews. Most of it harmless, but enough to violate data retention policy. A letter was sent to his legal counsel. A cease and desist. Then silence again. He didn't respond. But I knew he'd gotten the message. Still, it left a mark. The design team grew hesitant. Contractors became wary. Some junior managers who'd quietly admired Jordan before were now questioning my legitimacy. Not openly, but through careful questions, subtle deflections. I needed to reset the narrative. And not with a speech. With impact. So I did something bold. I announced a new initiative. Signal Stack, Mercer's first fully transparent cross-department product suite, modeled after the tools we'd used internally for months. A public roadmap. User-driven updates. Beta access for clients. No more black box leadership. No more cults of personality. Just proof. And I made sure to give credit where it was due. Connor's original rollout framework? Included. Sophie's backend performance script? Featured. Naomi's finance tracking model? Integrated. Everyone Jordan had ignored, stepped on, or overlooked. They now had their fingerprints on the future of Mercer. And slowly, the whispers changed. Rachel's team is fast. They actually fix things. Feels like someone finally turned the lights on. One evening, well after the office had cleared out, I got a message from an old contact. Someone I hadn't heard from since the early Carter Labs days. Jordan's still talking. But fewer people are listening now. And that's when I knew. He hadn't just lost the job. He'd lost the audience. 6 months after Jordan's exit, Mercer Technologies looked nothing like the company he'd left behind. The product roadmap was transparent. Client churn had reversed. Revenue was slowly climbing. And Signal Stack, our internal-to-external platform suite, had become the core of a new identity, fast, lean, human-focused. Internally, we were calling it a quiet renaissance. But I knew better. It wasn't a rebirth. It was a foundation. Because for all the progress we'd made, Mercer was still vulnerable. It was big, yes. Respected, maybe. But not future-proof. Not fearless. I didn't want to patch the roof. I wanted to build a castle. And that started with the one thing Mercer had never dared to do. Acquire. The target was a startup called Clarity Bridge. Small. Smart. Scrappy. Founded by 2 former UX engineers who had left a legacy fintech firm, Clarity Bridge had built an AI-based system that interpreted user behavior and translated it into design insights, live. It could show in real time where users were frustrated, where they paused, where they dropped off. It was elegant, light, and dangerously underfunded. They'd been pitching VCs for months, trying to raise a Series A. I'd been watching them quietly for 2. The founder, Daniel Price, had written a Medium post about the invisible friction in digital tools. His ideas weren't just sharp, they were aligned with what I'd been building since Carter Labs. I met with him through a mutual contact, under my own name, not Mercer's. Just coffee. Nothing formal. He recognized me. "You're the woman who replaced Jordan Pierce." I smiled. Not replaced. Just cleaned up the mess. He laughed. Then we talked for hours. Not about term sheets. About product pain. The thing was, Clarity Bridge wasn't struggling because their tech was weak. They were struggling because they had no sales machine. No enterprise strategy. No way to scale. Mercer had all of that. I left the meeting with one sentence in my notebook. Acquire, but don't absorb. Elena wasn't sold on the idea at first. An acquisition? Rachel, we're just stabilizing. Why open a flank now? But I had the numbers. I had the trajectory. I had client surveys proving signal stack adoption would double if paired with predictive UX tools like Clarity Bridge's. And I had timing. A month later, Clarity Bridge's lead investor pulled out of their funding round. Daniel sent me a short message. "You still watching?" Yes. Yes, I was. The negotiations were quiet. I kept them out of PR, off of Slack, and deep in private email threads. We structured it as a strategic product integration, not a hostile buyout. Daniel would stay on. His team would remain intact. But Clarity Bridge would become part of Mercer Labs, a new internal division I was forming quietly behind the scenes. While legal and finance finalized paperwork, I met with each of the Clarity Bridge engineers personally. I told them exactly what had happened to me, what Mercer had been, what I was trying to make it into. I didn't pitch them on stock options or perks. I gave them a vision. You won't be swallowed. You'll be elevated. The world is full of loud founders and shallow tech. I want to build real things with real people who've been ignored. That's the empire I'm building. The acquisition closed quietly. No press release. No ceremony. I leaked it the way I wanted to, through a single, simple update in Signal Stack's version notes. Now powered by real-time UX intelligence from the Clarity Bridge engine. The right people noticed. Fast. Within 3 weeks, we had 5 new enterprise clients asking for demos. Within 6, 2 competitors tried to schedule acquisition talks with Clarity Bridge, only to find it was already off the market. That's when Mercer's board called me into their quarterly summit. They asked for a presentation on the acquisition. I gave them more. I showed them the numbers, the user data, the long-term roadmap for how Mercer Labs, my division, could become the core of a next-generation product platform for every vertical we touched. Then I closed the deck with a single slide. Jordan built a pipeline of problems. I'm building a portfolio of solutions. They gave me a standing ovation. The next day, my contract was revised. Chief Product Officer. Effective immediately. That night, I sat in the same cafe where I'd once met Lena Brooks, the woman who told me, "If you're smart, you could be the last." I sent her a photo of the new nameplate on my office door. She replied with just one sentence. "The view's better when you build the tower yourself." And I smiled, because I wasn't just building one. I was building more. Titles change everything. Not just how people treat you, but how they listen. And when I became Mercer's Chief Product Officer, the silence I once operated in was gone. Suddenly, everyone was listening. Investors, executives, industry panels. Old colleagues who once ghosted my emails were now scheduling catch-up coffees. Journals that used to spotlight Jordan's smirking face now wanted to interview me about disruptive leadership models. But here's the thing no one tells you about rising. Once you reach the summit, you decide what the mountain looks like. And I wasn't going to let this summit be another throne for the loudest egos. I was going to build a platform, wide enough for every sharp mind who had ever been told they were too quiet, too different, too background. This was the era of the overlooked. And I was ready to build their empire. It started with a meeting, an internal review with all department heads. In Jordan's era, this was a power show. 15 people fighting for mic time while one man played judge. I flipped the script. I called it the Signal Roundtable. Every leader submitted their team's weekly highlight and pain point 24 hours in advance. I reviewed all of them personally. Then, in the meeting, I didn't ask who had wins. I asked, who here made someone else's work better this week? Silence. Then, Naomi spoke. Operations rewrote part of our dashboard logic. It saved us 3 hours of reconciling. Ronald added, design actually caught a logic flaw in one of our back-end assumptions. Fixed it before release. Suddenly, the room wasn't a war zone. It was a relay race. I followed it up with something even bolder. The Phoenix Program. A 6-month initiative to pull in ideas from Mercer's lowest levels, interns, juniors, assistants, and give them direct access to funding, mentorship, and execution power. No filters. No VP sign-offs. If it was good, we built it. If it worked, the creator presented it to leadership and owned it. People thought it would be chaos. Instead, it became Mercer's most powerful innovation engine. A 23-year-old from IT created a mobile-first performance alert tool that cut server response issues by 40%. A marketing assistant pitched a UX microcopy experiment that increased onboarding retention by 12%. A first-year designer rebuilt an internal ticketing system with gamified status updates, now used company-wide. One afternoon, after an all-hands demo day, I passed by a group of interns clustered around the snack station. I overheard one of them whisper, "She actually sees us." That one sentence stayed with me longer than any investor praise, because I remembered being unseen, being passed over, being told I wasn't ready. This empire wasn't built to impress shareholders. It was built for every person who'd ever done the work and gotten none of the credit. Of course, not everyone loved it. Some senior execs started pushing back, quietly. Too much power to the bottom. You're risking process bottlenecks. Are we sure these programs are scalable? And when I pushed to extend Phoenix into a permanent innovation pipeline, one board member actually said, "You're turning Mercer into a charity." I replied, "No, I'm turning it into a future no one saw coming." That didn't go over well. 3 weeks later, a quiet internal memo leaked. A small faction of board members was questioning whether my leadership style was long-term compatible with Mercer's core values. Translation: too much change. Too fast. Too many outsiders at the table. So I made another move. Carter Labs came back to life. Not as a company, as a coalition. I reached out to my old network, the small devs, the indie designers, the engineers who had been edged out of larger companies. We offered partnerships, revenue-sharing opportunities, and resource exchanges through Mercer Labs. No NDAs. No IP grabs. Just collaboration. We called it the Glasshouse Collective. The message was simple. If you're overlooked, you're invited. Mercer's competitors started noticing. Suddenly, the company they'd mocked for appointing the assistant-turned-leader was rolling out tools faster than they could keep up. Suddenly, junior engineers had LinkedIn profiles that read, "Product owner at Mercer, launched through Phoenix Program." We weren't just fixing what Jordan broke. We were becoming unbreakable. Then came the invitation. An industry-wide tech summit. New York. Panel topic: What's next for product leadership? I was asked to keynote. Jordan Pierce was on the schedule too, a late addition. Listed as founder, Pierce Advisory. He was moderating a panel. The irony was delicious. I thought about saying no, but instead I wrote my speech. I called it, "Legacy is for Cowards." The auditorium was colder than I expected. It wasn't nerves, not exactly. It was memory, because just 2 years ago, I had sat in the back of a room like this, watching Jordan Pierce take the stage, watching people clap for him, watching as he threw around buzzwords and sharp smiles like confetti. And now, I was the one walking toward the lights. The screen behind me flickered to life. Legacy is for Cowards. That was the title I chose. Bold. Maybe too bold. But I meant every word of it. I stepped up to the mic, adjusted the sleeves of my blazer. No longer a borrowed one, no longer cheap. And I looked out at the room. CEOs. Founders. Journalists. Junior engineers in ill-fitting suits. And just off to the side, sitting in the moderator row, was Jordan Pierce. Still tan. Still expensive. Still pretending none of this had happened. I didn't flinch. When I started in this industry, people talked a lot about legacy. Legacy platforms. Legacy founders. Legacy processes. It was all code for one thing. Power that never had to change. I was told to stay quiet. To learn. To wait. I was told I wasn't leadership material, because I asked questions, because I fixed things instead of taking credit, because I didn't look the part. And when I finally stood up, when I finally pointed at the cracks in the walls, I wasn't thanked. I was punished. I paused. But you already know that story. What you don't know is what happened next. I told them about Signal Stack, about Phoenix, about how our youngest team members saved us millions, not through hierarchy but through insight. I told them about Clarity Bridge and Glasshouse Collective, and how we built something unstoppable by trusting the people no one else would bet on. And then I said this: legacy is afraid of reinvention. Legacy wants comfort, not truth. But power built on silence is rotting from within. I don't want a legacy. I want a path, wide enough for every voice that was ever dismissed, doubted, or denied. The room stood still. Not clapping yet. Just still. Even Jordan. He didn't smile. Didn't nod. Didn't move. Because he knew, everyone knew, he wasn't the future anymore. He was footnote. After the speech, I walked off stage. A junior developer stopped me in the hallway. Nervous, shaking, probably 23. Rachel, I don't have a question. I used to think I'd never belong in this world. I smiled. You don't have to belong to their world. You can build your own. A week later, an op-ed appeared in TechCurrent. The Quiet Revolution. How Rachel Carter turned survival into power. That headline stayed pinned on Mercer's intranet for months. And the best part? I didn't even write it. Because by then, I didn't have to speak for myself anymore. The work was speaking. The people I'd empowered were speaking. And for the first time, Jordan Pierce had nothing left to say. They called me too soft, then too smart, then too ambitious. Now they just call me boss. If this story kept you hooked, there's plenty more where that came from. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story of payback, power, and redemption. This is Revenge Fury, where karma always cashes in.